Thank you, Madam President. We'd like to thank the ASG, Mr. Khaled Khiari, for his substantive briefing about the situation surrounding the hostages detained in the Gaza Strip. Our hearts were filled with sorrow as we listened to the tragic story of Mr. Eli Sharabi, who lost his entire family. Such brutality can have no justification. We express to you, Mr. Sharabi, our heartfelt condolences. We also grieve over all those who died as a result of the escalation which has been going on for over 18 months now. This endless, vicious cycle of violence needs to end at last. The unbearable suffering of peaceable civilians in the area of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict leave no one indifferent. For that very reason, on the 19th of January, the international community welcomed the establishment of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. This not only stopped the spiral of violence which claimed the lives of over 49,000 people, but also resulted in the long-awaited release of hostages held in Gaza and of Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. During phase 1 of the deal, 25 hostages were handed over to Israel, as well as 8 bodies, in exchange for almost 1,800 Palestinian detainees. Also, during the 40-day truce, Gazans and Israelis still held hostage there began to harbor hopes of salvation. Access to the enclave was unblocked, humanitarian activities were ramped up, and UN entities reported that humanitarian deliveries to the enclave were increased. The world breathed a sigh of relief. And yet, as the end of phase 1 drew closer, the prospects of further implementation of the deal were called into question. Since day 1 of the truce, the Israeli leadership consistently stepped up its bellicose rhetoric while maintaining an IDF presence in the Strip. The switch to phase 2 of the deal, entailing a permanent ceasefire and the release of all remaining hostages in Gaza, is not even something the Israeli leadership entertained. Instead, the Israeli authorities, despite the deal reached thanks to the mediators, have stubbornly been promoting the idea of a purely technical extension of the ceasefire so as to secure the return of all hostages. For a long time, the situation was up in the air. Yet the window of opportunity to restart a comprehensive peaceful settlement process was slammed shut on the 18th of March when the IDF resumed airstrikes on the Strip. As a result, over 420 people died, including a UNOPS staffer. 5 more UN personnel were wounded. As the UNSC stated, the death toll since the 7th of October 2023, that is among UN staff, is at least 280 people. We join our voice to the decisive condemnation by the Secretary-General of attacks on UN staff and his call for a full investigation into this incident. Madam President, we deeply regret the resumption by Israel of military operations in the Gaza Strip. And as far as we can tell, what we're talking about here is not just airstrikes, but also a ground operation. We decisively condemn any actions leading to the deaths of civilians and the further destruction of social infrastructure. We are particularly disheartened by reports about indiscriminate attacks waged by the Israeli Air Force on Mawasi, an area which Israel had previously designated as a humanitarian safe zone where all those needing emergency medical care could be evacuated to. As a result, today, we heard about Israeli cities being shelled from Gaza, including Tel Aviv. This was predictable, given that violence breeds violence. In parallel, Israel resumed a full-blown blockade on the Strip, stopping supplies of water and electricity, despite this obviously posing a threat to the life and safety of all those who remain there, including Israeli hostages. Such a decision is a particularly flagrant violation of international humanitarian law and can be characterized as a war crime. The issue of survival, which Palestinians are being confronted with, is complicated by the critical situation facing UNRWA operations, UNRWA being a key entity for comprehensive support being provided to the Palestinians. By tightening the screws in the Gaza Strip, the Israeli leadership is simultaneously taking illegal steps, including the military operation in the West Bank. Tomorrow, we will have an opportunity to discuss this topic in greater detail. Madam President, today we were acutely disappointed to see that the ceasefire, which we had all worked towards for so long, turned out to be unsustainable. It's hard to discuss its future prospects when the Israeli military and political leadership is openly announcing its intent to use mounting force against Hamas and to hold future deal negotiations exclusively under fire. It would appear that they've already made the choice in favor of war. Who knows how many new victims await Palestine and Israel in the future? We believe that the fragility of the agreements which Israel has just flouted is also explained by the fact that the Security Council, since the very beginning, the Council knew very little about the details of the negotiations paving the way for the deal. Since the outset, the Security Council was deliberately cut off from this process, and the entire emphasis was placed on other intermediaries. Hence, the entire specialized UN toolkit wasn't needed, although the use of this toolkit could have made the ceasefire sustainable. It's important for those who are going to be working on the restoration of the ceasefire in the Strip to be cognizant of this fact. Despite the new escalation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we stand convinced that a diplomatic solution is not only possible, but that is the only realistic option. We call on the Israeli and Palestinian parties, with assistance of intermediaries, to go back to the negotiations table to craft a mutually acceptable compromise solution to the issue of detained persons, a return to the ceasefire, and a resumption of comprehensive humanitarian access. This could allow for a sustainable normalization in the Gaza Strip and for the kickstarting of a full-scale reconstruction of the enclave. We stand convinced that this is precisely what peaceable Palestinians, as well as the relatives and loved ones of hostages that remain in Gaza, wish for, including Mr. Maxim Herkin, who was born in the Donbass. It's important for all regional players and the international community as a whole to work towards this end. The process of Israeli-Palestinian settlement should return to the political track so as to satisfy all of Israel's lawful security concerns, as well as Palestinians' aspirations to their own state within 1967 borders. We stand ready to pursue this objective here in the Security Council, together with all those who share in this approach. I thank you.